soon enough, but they have certainly been learned. And now we can see that the geopolitical and geoeconomic imperative of economic security is crucial in terms of strengthening neighborhood ties. So this discussion is going to look at how the EU can further enhance its strategic partnerships, its membership negotiations with various countries, and connectivity initiatives to ensure that Europe's economic security has mutual benefits for all of the countries in the neighborhood and beyond. And we have, we're in for a real treat actually, because we have a really great group of speakers to discuss this with us today, who I'm going to introduce very briefly. Data Tentere, who is an expert in the cabinet of Commissioner Marcos Sefcovic, who is the Commissioner for Trade and Economic Security. Ambassador Lindsay Crossdale-Appleby, who is head of the UK mission to the EU. A big welcome to you both. Ambassador Vsevolod Chentsov, who is head of the mission of Ukraine to the EU. Welcome, Ambassador. Ambassador Anders Heed, who is the head of the Norwegian mission to the EU. Welcome to you. And last but certainly not least, we have Dilek Aydin, who is the head of the Turkish Industry and Business Association to the EU. Welcome to you, Dilek. Very nice to have you here today. So I'm going to start with a sort of question to you, Ms. Tentere. I guess a sort of overarching question, if I can put it that way. Could you sort of evaluate how the strategic focus of the EU's neighbourhood and enlargement policies has been shifting? I mean, particularly in response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and the impact that's also had more broadly on Europe, and within the context of a much more fragmented global context. Because we're not living in a vacuum here. Many things have been changing. How can the EU better align these policies with its internal security agenda?
No, thanks a lot, and really a pleasure to be here, and congratulations to the organizers to really impressive events. I was actually, what we talked a bit before, I mean, I was thinking yesterday of neighborhood and of enlargement countries and on partner countries, and then in the context very much of the economic security and how we approach economic security or the thinking on economic security. And that is true when we look at the three pillars of our work on economic security, which is promote, protect, and partner. Somehow, naturally, when we talk about the partner side of the things, we tend to think quite far away. we think about Japan, we think about Canada, we think about these more of ingrained strategic dialogues that we are pursuing. But of course, and perhaps there is also the element of the sector, right? Because very often this then comes down to the supply chains of semiconductors, of technology, and these kind of things, and that's why we tend to perhaps make it a bit more abstract. But in fact, really, when we talk about economic security, we talk at this as a starting point of the further integration or closer integration of markets, of supply chains internally, of free flow of goods, services, and so on, depending again on the sector. And then, of course, our neighborhood and our candidate countries, this is really the key where we need to look at and where we need to focus. And I'm sure we will come to this in the discussion, and of course there is areas like critical raw materials, energy, which are particularly relevant when we talk about the countries in question. But just to say, and perhaps then indeed we can go very much in detail, that what we are doing in this commission and with this also approach on economic security and to the neighborhood policy is very much to try to integrate the policy areas and put them together, because indeed, whether it's a strategic partnership on critical raw materials that we have, for instance, with Ukraine, or whether it's any kind of energy deals or anything, we need to, or we are trying to put it in a broader context of what we do on economic security and try to put those together.
Could you, if just a quick follow-up, could you just touch on what are the main initiatives from the side of the Commission in terms of programs at the moment?
You mean on economic security?
Yeah, I mean, no, in terms of strengthening neighborhood ties.
I mean, I think we are looking quite a bit on the. I mean, for instance, there is the work that is ongoing also on the southern neighborhood, which is of course a different question. But then, I mean, with Ukraine, for instance, of course, is the whole accession process. I mean, this is a key element of our strengthening of our neighborhood relations.
Absolutely. And talking about Ukraine, I want to come to you, Ambassador Chensov. I mean, it might seem obvious to many people, but why is a just and long-term peace in Ukraine crucial to economic security as well as normal security in the whole continent?
Thank you very much for organizing this event, and many thanks also for your attention. I mean, as an organization to Ukraine, Ukraine-EU relations, and in this case, our trade and economic relations. And today, I don't want to sound very sarcastic, but today it's a perfect timing. Today, European Union terminated autonomous trade measures with Ukraine, and it's a alarm call, right, for member states, for the Commission, really to make a decision whether we are talking about real integration. I'm not talking about fast integration, real integration, and sustainable relations. Then both parties stick to the commitments, or we are talking about something else, partnerships. Ukraine is a competitor to the EU. It's a fact, but also it's opportunity for EU member states and beyond the EU. And I think we need to consider those relations in a quite a broader sense, rather than protecting interests of certain groups in the EU, however important are those groups, culturally, socially, so on and so forth. So, and when we are talking about agriculture, and the main reason why ATMs were terminated, it's about agriculture. But whether we have real risks and challenges for the EU economy, for the food security of the EU, or we are talking about political, let's say, political situation and interests of certain groups, and so on and so forth. So my point is, we need to be serious. We need to see a big picture, and also back to your question, how we see this link between economic security and Ukraine fight for its survival. So it's not only about our independence or European choice. And in this case, we would count on more solidarity, on more openness, and continuation of this lifeline, because ATMs, autonomous trade measures, they were this lifeline for Ukrainian economy. And we also need to understand to what extent our economies have been already integrated. It's not about who sells more to whom, right? And when we are talking about the trade surplus, it's in favor of the EU, 18 billion. So if you ask somebody, not only on the street, even in the European Parliament, what is the situation? I think people would say, Ukraine is throwing all this agricultural product on the EU, but reality is different. So we want now to, because we have a chance to stabilize the situation. So the situation is not that bad. So we have it. It's challenging because since today, from today, we need to work really fast and really efficient and with the spirit of solidarity and togetherness to come up with something maybe if not that good as autonomous trade measures, which is the full opening, but at least something really solid which would help Ukrainian economy to continue functioning under such a tremendous pressure that we have from Russia, and not only Russia.
But why is this solidarity not already there? I mean, we're already more than 3 years into a full-scale invasion. Or what can be done to further strengthen this solidarity? I mean, I was in Ukraine last week and actually heard from many people deep concerns about this topic, but also about the accession process in general, and not just because of the Hungarian blockade. I mean, the issue of the Ukraine's potential entry into the single market, which should be something that should happen sooner rather than later, seems also to be surrounded by challenges. But at the end of the day, this sort of intertwining, increasing intertwining of Ukraine with Europe is about all of our economic security and normal security. So it's very difficult to understand why now, of all times, there isn't this solidarity, and what can be done to increase it.
Well, I think many people they have just grown used to this Russian war against Ukraine. It's for many people it's a kind of a new normality, and they say, well, Ukraine is strong enough to survive. Maybe it's too much for Ukraine to get this market access. Our farmers are under the pressure. So one thing, you are under the pressure and you want more subsidies. Something else, then Russians bomb our farmers when they're in the field. And I think many of you saw those, terrible images, of the Ukrainian fields in fire. So this is a difference. Challenges which European farmers face and Ukrainian farmers. So what is the answer? The answer is that we have to be serious. We have to speak the same language. We have to understand the magnitude of threat which Russian Federation pose not only for Ukraine but broader, and we all understand what we are talking about. But if Ukrainian economy fails, who will save Ukraine, right? It means that for EU, for UK, for Norway, it will be much more difficult and also expensive to help us. And we don't have other partners to help. So the answer is very simple. Give us possibility to earn money, to create jobs, to develop our regions, and there will be less burden on the EU budgets and the budgets of our friends. So we need to have serious, frank discussion in the spirit of solidarity, as you said.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. And I want to stay on this topic and come to another ambassador, to you, Ambassador Eid. I mean, I'd like you to comment a bit as well on what the Ukrainian ambassador has just been saying, the importance now for European security to actually, at this moment, shore up support for Ukraine. I mean, the country's going through exceptionally difficult days, and there still seems to be some political will missing from the partners. But also touch a bit on, I mean, Norway has been crucial in terms of energy security in replacing Russian gas supplies. And how do you see this progressing further in the future? I mean, Norway's ability to provide more gas and other energy sources.
Thank you, Amanda. First of all, let me express my admiration and gratitude towards the Ukrainian ambassador and the Ukrainian people for your remarkable resistance and resilience, and for defending your own freedom and democracy and right to choose your path, but also ours. So rest assured, we will continue to stand by you and support you for as long as this takes. And that also includes your accession process to the EU. In fact, we support most EU accession processes except our own. As some of you may know, we have had 2 referenda in Norway in 72 and 94, but it has ended up 51-49 in the wrong direction both times. So, but we are still as interconnected and integrated with the EU as you can possibly get, I guess, as a non-member state, based on the agreement on the European Economic Area, which has functioned well for 31 years now. So every month we meet with our colleagues in the Commission and we incorporate the new legal acts adopted by the EU. So over these years we have incorporated more than 14,000 legal acts into the EEA agreement. So we have our fully integrated internal market in the 4 freedoms, the competition rules, state aid rules, and so on. In addition to that, we have expanded our cooperation. So we have a Green Alliance pushing the green transition together. We have a partnership on security and defense, where I would say that the most important focus now is, of course, to support Ukraine. And we do have more or less 100 bilateral agreements in addition to that. So we are extremely closely integrated with the European Union. You alluded to energy. Yes, energy is also an important factor. And of course, after Putin's weaponization of energy and manipulation of the markets since 2021, Norway has become an even more important supplier of natural gas, especially to the EU. So I think that Norwegian companies are now, or companies operating on the Norwegian continental shelf, are now providing 30 to 40% of the EU gas consumption. So that's a significant part of our trade and an important focus, both for the Norwegian government and also for the companies from Europe, from Norway, operating on the Norwegian continental shelf, for Norway to remain a stable and reliable supplier of energy to Europe for as long as it is needed. But of course, at the same time, I would say, pushing the green transition and the electrification of energy and so on.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I'd like to turn to our last ambassador. Of course, because I work on Ukraine, I'm not going to give up the opportunity to ask you the same question as well about the need for further shoring up support for Ukraine now, including in terms of economic security, but also to ask you about the thawing of the relationship between the UK and the EU. I mean, we heard quite a lot yesterday morning because there's been a number of speakers yesterday. But if you could just flag, I mean, the priority areas, and where does this fit in with the sort of new dynamic in UK-US relations? I mean, the UK was the first country, I think, to sign a new deal with President Trump a couple of weeks ago.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's very nice to be here. I think a good place to start the answer to that question is a bit what has the Commission and the EU done to strengthen its relationships with all its nearest partners? And I think the answer to that under the von der Leyen Commission has been a lot. First of all, they brought a team into the Secretariat General in the Commission under the direction of the President and Maroš Šefčovič to deal with Western partners as a group. And I think that shows the political importance that the von der Leyen Commission and Maroš himself has attached to kind of really making a success of the relationships with the close neighbours. And that's a kind of recognition that for the EU, the close neighbours pose a sort of different set of economic opportunities and a different set sometimes of kind of challenges because of the proximity. So we have found that that strategic approach has been consistent throughout this commission and the previous commission. I think you can see aspects of that in the refreshed approach to enlargement. That's clearly, obviously, a matter for the EU rather than the UK. But it's very clear that the Commission has shown a lot of determination and leadership in taking forward the enlargement process in a thoughtful way, not just with Ukraine, but also with Moldova, with countries like Albania, but more broadly too, not just the sort of established partners, where they've worked hard on the EEA, for example, but also the partners who are, were traditionally bunched as the kind of Eastern Partnership or the Southern Partnership. What the von der Leyen Commission has done from our perspective is they've developed relationships with each of those countries. So there's a strategy towards Armenia and Azerbaijan. There's a very close relationship with Egypt, which has its complications, but is obviously critical to some of the migration delivery objectives that the EU has. So for us, what we genuinely see, and one of the reasons I think we work very well with the EU at the moment, is because I think both the UK and the EU actually have quite a strategic approach to their neighbourhood. That, of course, has been driven by Russia's invasion and aggression against Ukraine. We are fully committed to our economic relationship with Ukraine. We've signed a 100-year security deal. We are there to stay. We recognise that for some bits of the EU, those economic challenges feel sharp in the agriculture sector, for example. But for us, when we think about the neighbourhood, and this is why we still have a set of very liberal trade measures towards Ukraine, we basically think that our European partners, whether it's Turkey or whether it's Ukraine, that is how you strengthen what we would call European competitiveness. Because these are partners who broadly share our values and our interests, and they have a set of rules in place to ensure that competition is reasonably organized and fair. Of course, we're competitors, but we're all competitors within frameworks. And the framework for the UK is the Trade and Cooperation Agreement that has unprecedented level playing field provisions, in the same way as the EEA is a very specific kind of agreement, and in the same way the enlargement process produces commitments. And I do think it's important to highlight that if we were fighting a war, I doubt we would be doing a lot of domestic reform at the same time. But that is actually what Ukraine is doing at the moment, and it's very impressive. I'm not sure in the UK we would be doing anything else but fighting a war. But in Ukraine's case, they are tackling some deep-seated structural issues. I think the point that I wanted to make about how this really relates to the theme of economic security is I think the challenge for us all is using the kind of policies that are put forward by the Commission is to make sense of these kind of economic partnerships. So we have a security partnership. We've agreed one very similar to the Norwegian one, in fact. But I think the challenge probably over the next 6 months, 2 years, is to make sense of some of the strands of these economic security partnerships. And I think a very good example of that is the Union's approach to kind of special projects. So the Union has 13 of these strategic projects around the world. I think it's worth noting that one of them is in Norway, one of them is in Ukraine, and one of them is in the UK. They focus on the actual delivery of critical minerals in a shared way across the whole of Europe and with other like-minded partners. So for me, this question of how you get the most out of shared supply chains is to the benefit of EU and to UK companies that those supply chains are as integrated as possible. I think we all learned that during COVID. We discovered, for example, that COVID vaccines involved buying lipids from a kind of special factory in the UK that produced a particular kind of lipid, but that was one of 15 different things that you needed to make a COVID vaccine. And throughout that, we did provide assurance on both sides that we would continue supplying those materials. And because of the EU, the UK, Norway, Ukraine, Turkey's shared commitment to kind of global trading rules, I think we start all of those debates in a strong place. And I think the different economic challenges and security challenges of the last 3 or 4 years have reminded us that actually most of our principles are in common. Of course, we have differences about particular sectors, but an example of that is the work that we're doing post the summit with the EU on steel, where steel imports from the UK are not a threat to EU industry because we have level playing field provisions. So we're working together to make sure that safeguards don't become an obstacle to that kind of trade. We have agreed with the EU that we will work on an SPS agreement because we basically have the same food standards. So why, if we have the same food standards, shouldn't food flow relatively freely? Of course, we need to provide reassurance to the EU that we won't undermine their market in an unfair way. So for me, those kind of getting those economic linkages and developing them, that will actually contribute to all our competitiveness and to Ukraine's security.
You mentioned, the phrase like-minded partners as being the sort of key here. What about those countries that aren't necessarily always termed as like-minded partners? And I'm going to come to you in a second. But I mean, Turkey, there is some, let's say there's some differences of opinion over whether Turkey is still a like-minded or not a like-minded partner. I mean, how would you view the relationship between the EU and Turkey, the importance of Turkey actually for European security, economic security, however you want to define that, particularly given the current developments in the country, I mean, against the backdrop of that? Does it make things more difficult?
Well, it's tricky for me, obviously, to comment on the EU's relationship with Turkey. I can say a bit more about how the UK sees the issues with Turkey. Well, I mean, UK consumers are tremendously grateful for the products that they get from Turkey. We get tremendously high-quality manufactured goods from Turkey, and those contribute to our supply chains in the UK and contribute to the competitiveness of UK firms internationally. So it's not only do we buy Spanish electricity, not only do we use French water companies, but almost every house in the UK has a fridge or a freezer which is made in Turkey, for example. So we have very strong economic links with Turkey, which we believe are mutually beneficial. We think that Turkey has always been a very reliable trading partner for the UK. They are a strong and vocal member of the WTO. They have consistently supported open trading across the world. So for us, we have a very strong relationship. It doesn't stop governments having political differences about particular choices. But again, we've always found Turkey, an extremely important NATO ally, extremely important guarantor of NATO security in the East. And, at critical points in our security relationship with Turkey, for example, if you take a very difficult situation like the evacuation from Afghanistan, one of the groups of troops that were guarding the airfield were Turkish troops. And Turkey has played a critical role in Somalia, for example, and in various parts of the neighborhood. So we've always seen Turkey as a very important partner, and a partner that needs to be treated with kind of respect in the same way that Turkey treats us with respect. So do we agree on everything? I don't think we do, but we don't agree with everything with our neighbors like France and Germany either. So, there are always going to be some political difficulties. We've always supported a strong Euro-Atlantic relationship, and we're a very big supporter of the work that Turkey does in NATO.
Thank you, Ambassador. I come to you, Dilek, to continue this conversation. I mean, can you sort of flag up where the main challenges are now in terms of the ties, I mean, the economic the economic security dimension that Turkey can play for Europe isn't straightforward. I mean, there's many things on the table, but most of them are either frozen or not moving. I'm talking particularly, for example, the upgrade of the modernization of the customs union. I mean, how detrimental is this in terms of further strengthening economic security in the region?
Thank you, Amanda. Well, I would say, in fact, EU-Turkey relations already contributing to a large extent to the security, economic security, and also competitiveness of Europe, both the EU and Europe. I think the linkages that we have as European economies, both candidate countries and partners, and the countries like Norway, UK, Switzerland, Turkey also integrated to the EU single market through different modifications, modules, but still we are highly integrated already in the market. And Ukraine and Western Balkans and Turkey also as a candidate country, we are aligning with the EU policies to a large extent. So this is already strengthening the value chains. This is already strengthening the competitiveness efforts, so we should note this. But you're right, there are obstacles at the moment. In fact, I mean, I must acknowledge that most often than not, EU-Turkey relations feels like a time machine stuck in reverse. But the basic problem, I would say, we need to be frank about it, it's mutual distrust. And time will not fix it. This is not a love affair. We are most of the time very emotional about it. And the world right now is not a honeymoon resort, let's say. So we need to get serious about the potential. Yes, we need to acknowledge the difficulties and we need to speak about them, but we need to change the methodology. In the last decade, the modus operandi was like blocking everything, not seizing the opportunities, and then engage at times of crisis. And we're stuck in this vicious cycle. We need to urgently break through this vicious cycle, because otherwise we will find ourselves in a moment where we are still addressing of the problems of the past, but not shaping the future. And we're living in a world of, there's war on the continent. The long-term security architecture is being challenged. The competitiveness, we see the erosion of the competitiveness. At the same time, rightfully, EU is coming up with sustainability goals, green transition, clean transition, digital transformation, but these comes with complex regulatory changes as well. So we need a broader alignment and agreement on the rule set as well. And as candidate countries, as partners, trading partners, as integration partners, we need to be able to have closer dialogue, not just dialogue, but exercise of working together on this new rule set as well. And how to fix the distress. So it requires a constant and conscious effort to methodologically solve the issue. And indeed, the customs union is the best answer for that. It will bring us measurable goals, a clear timeline, and a rules-based system of convergence. And that could establish the basis for convergence in the other fields, other strategic fields like energy transition. I mean, Turkey and European market is highly integrated when it comes to production of renewable technologies. Turkey is a reliable partner in the wind value chain. We need to, we're talking about energy security, we need to start talking about the future of energy security, our renewable chains. Logistics, we need to talk about the middle corridor. We need to cooperate both on hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. I mean, these are not just vague concepts. There are opportunities there, and we need to get serious about them. I mean, it's and yeah, I mean, we can go into the
It is-
details of customs union.
how important is it now, I mean, for Turkey to be included in some of the defense initiatives? I mean, this has been discussed now for several weeks, Turkey's potential role or being allowed into EU defense projects. How do you see that?
I mean, that's the most rational way forward, I would say. I mean, Turkey is already integrated. Yeah, we are a NATO country. We have strong cooperation on defense, increasingly so with both EU member states and all the European partners. It is the growth of the Turkish defense industry is clear. We give huge importance on our security cooperation and also defense industrial cooperation with Ukraine, for instance, and we need to build on these. So we can choose to do it slowly, with a lot of hesitations, or we can, again, concentrate on the task ahead and rapidly move. What does it mean? For instance, we recently discussed, and we were discussing now, it's agreed and entered into force, SAFE instrument. I mean, in the light of that, with the member states, EU member states and Turkey should move rapidly forward with defense industry deals. This is critical. But I would say I would tie it again to the customs union modernization. Don't think that I don't have any other answer, but the customs union would also feed stronger defense industry cooperation as well, because it's about industrial transformation, and we can give the legal framework and the structure and the rules for that through the customs union as well. So this is one of the issues. When there's a security crisis, we start to talk about defense cooperation, security cooperation. Turkey is an important partner. When there's a migration crisis, we start to address migration as a fragmented area. And then we have this very transactional, very fragmented, and they all become highly problematic in time because it doesn't have an integration perspective. So we need to get out of that mode, and we need to stop crisis management and have a strategic foresight and strategic engagement for defense, yes, for broader economic security as well.
Okay, thank you, Dilek. I'm going to do another round of questions, and I'm going to come to the floor, to the audience for your questions. So please get your questions ready. I want to come back to you, Darta, to ask you about the global gateway strategy that we hear quite a lot about. I mean, how can this be strengthened to further strengthen regional and economic alliances?
I mean, I think it's exactly, I mean, Global Gateway is part of or one of the cornerstones, but that dates back to the previous commission and previous mandate, that what we've been doing, of to see also how we can operationalize and go more in a project-based approach to things. And I think Ambassador mentioned that before. And this is the very important angle of it. How do we look and how do we move from the abstract towards concrete? And this is really this operational part of the things is currently what matters. With a global gateway, true, it extends way beyond neighborhood, way beyond the close neighborhoods. But at the same time, I think the important thing is that it passes this message, that we are willing to go, or we are committed to go, into very project-based approaches. At the same time, and I think that comes together more with the broader international partnerships and broader cooperation, is how do we do, or can we find a margin to do such projects, including in the margins of the Global Gateway, together with other partners? For instance, my commissioner was just recently traveling also to Japan, where we have a very close conversation on these kind of issues. And that was one of the questions that came up. How can we look as partner countries on jointly interesting projects in other third countries to cooperate on those, to bring tangible benefits, to bring and to make the benefits on the both sides of the equation? So true, Global Gateway is one very good example in terms of pooling pooling the funds, pooling the resources, gathering the investments. But I think that is more of also of a cross-cutting approach.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Chensov, come back to Ukraine's EU accession process and EU economic security. I mean, you touched on it before, but what will Ukraine be bringing to the table in terms of strengthening the EU's economic security? I mean, I can think of several areas that go beyond agriculture. But maybe you could specify, because sometimes there's a perception that new countries are consumers rather than givers. And I think it's important to actually explain that Ukraine will actually be making a major contribution into the EU's economic security, among other things.
Well, indeed, thank you very much for the question. Indeed, it's not only agriculture. Ukraine, we just touch upon the issue of defense industry, right? So Ukraine managed to develop its defense industry very rapidly, almost from scratch, because we used to have basically the government own defense industry sector till 2022, and before 2013, a lot of our enterprises, like well-known company Antonov, they used to cooperate mainly with Russia, right? And it was a quite high level of integration. And we've since 2014, and especially after full-fledged invasion, so we faced this kind of a double challenge, because we were not integrated with the EU industry and the partners, especially in that field. And also we face a tremendous shortage of not only weapons but the components. And still, unfortunately, we're still dependent, for instance, on China on electronics when we are talking about drone production. So Ukraine produces a lot, but still there is a great deal of dependency. So how to overcome it, and the SAFE program and the broader approach to kind of a reconstruction of the EU defense industrial base also open the opportunity for Ukraine, and vice versa, because EU can produce in Ukraine cheaper and also products which are tested on the battlefield. It's just one of the examples, but there are many. We used to have quite a few work streams with the EU on biogas, on green transition, so on and so forth. How to unite those different directions of cooperation under one roof? This is a question, I think it's relevant not only for Ukraine, but also for Turkey, for instance, for UK probably as well. How to come up with a kind of a logic of this broader industrial partnership. And I think Commission now suggests a smart answer to this challenge called Single Market Highway. How we candidate countries and partners can jump on this highway and move fast. There are three dimensions for this new framework, which is how we build together supply chains, which is sustainable, how we approximate in a fast and in a meaningful way in terms of regulatory framework, and we are going to finalize the ACA agreement hopefully soon. And third pillar is how we activate interaction between the companies in Ukraine and the EU. So, and if you complete this picture with already existing dialogues, which I mentioned, sectoral dialogues. So it could probably help to build the system and to get all players, governments, industry, civil society engaged.
Thank you, Ambassador Chensov. Now come back to you, Ambassador E, to sort of continue what we were talking about before related to energy security and Norway's role. As we discussed, Norway is a crucial partner, and I'm afraid I'm going to be slightly provocative. I mean, Norway is threatening to cut or not renew these electric cables to Denmark. So how far does the solidarity go? And is this something that can be reversed? I mean, this concept of cutting the cable.
Well, Norway is not threatening to cut the cables. But yes, there is an internal debate in Norway about our interconnectors and the renewal of those interconnectors. And I don't think it's only in Norway. I think that we are now in the middle of a very deep societal economic transformation of our energy systems, and that inevitably creates some debate, some political debates. We have been in Norway and the Nordics closely interconnected for a number of years. It has worked brilliantly, providing energy security, lower prices, and the phasing in of a lot of new renewable energy in the Nordics. We have expanded this interconnectors also to the UK and to Germany, and I've seen the same debate in several other countries as well, that this one price zone that they have in Germany, that has created some import of high prices, especially when we have this famous new word Dunkelflaute in Germany and the continent, where it's not blowing and there's no sunshine.
Yeah.
Again, I think that we have a huge transition going on. Lots of new renewable energy is fortunately phased into the grid. But we also see, like we saw on the Iberian Peninsula a few weeks ago, that the grid is the European grid, and that is a challenge for almost every European country, I think. The grid is not fully fitted for the purpose yet, but a lot of work is going on. So that's where we are. Yeah.
Thank you. It's good to know it's not going to be abandoned. So thank you. A question to you, Ambassador. So many ambassadors. It's about transport corridors. I mean, particularly the transport corridors that are between the Baltic and the Black Sea. I mean, where the Russians sort of maneuver in both. I mean, they're very active now in the Baltic Sea. We've seen problems with underwater cables and whatnot. But there's also a number of transport corridors that are crucial for shipping. I mean, for example, the Danube was important as a different route for getting grain from Ukraine out. Would it not be important to actually shore up the security to a much greater extent of these corridors and having a greater link between the Baltic and Black Sea to strengthen security, but also to prevent Russia from being able to manipulate security in those regions?
Well, I have to admit, I wasn't fully expecting a question about the Baltic and the Black Sea from a UK perspective, but we have a global outlook. So I think the place that I would start is, and I think this is where it's very welcome that the Commission has brought forward its white paper on defence and security. I think the place that I would start is that we need to decide kind of what is critical infrastructure and what isn't critical infrastructure. And we are facing a set of new challenges, particularly obviously in the cyber area. You know, for the UK, when you look at our critical national resilience plan, you know, the computer system that underpins our national health system is a critical vulnerability that we wouldn't have particularly thought of 5 or 6 years ago. So transport corridors, I think, fit in that category. We do need to do more, and here I think the kind of front end of what we need to do in Europe is what NATO defines as collective defense around those critical infrastructures. And NATO has amended and evolved its forward plans, and part of our job as member states of NATO, but also working with the EU, is to ensure that we have the structures underneath to support the capabilities that we need in a cost-effective way. And that takes me kind of directly to kind of the undersea cable challenge. So what is the undersea cable challenge? It turns out that cables under the sea, sometimes people mess with them using horrible submarines, and sometimes the weather is quite bad, and the cables get damaged. And sometimes it's quite genuinely difficult to tell the difference between those things, because certain of our adversaries are very sneaky. So, of course, they sort of pretend that, you know, it could have happened in any which way. But in fact, you then discover that there was a submarine nearby or one of their nefarious devices. So what we need to do is not patrol every bit of the Baltic and every bit of the North Sea and every bit of the Black Sea, because that isn't, you know, a sensible strategic way of using limited marine resources. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we have the capability across Europe to actually address the problems as they arise and to do sufficient kind of integrated work through NATO to check that there is sufficient security in each of those zones. And I think that's that's an excellent example of why the partnerships with Turkey are very important. You know, what are we going to do about the Black Sea? Well, unless Ukraine and Turkey are doing something about the Black Sea, it's obviously not going to be a very impressive effort, frankly. Similarly, I think one of the things that has really underpinned the strategic partnership between Norway and the UK is our work together in the area of the kind of northeast Atlantic, which is particularly vulnerable to kind of Russian interference, and which potentially, of course, could disrupt transatlantic communication. And you know, I think part of Norway and the UK's particular role in NATO is to kind of protect that area. We work very closely with Iceland on that as well, as you would expect. So I do think we need to do that, but we need to do it in a way that is kind of resource efficient. What none of us can afford to do in tight fiscal constraints is spend money individually on things that we could be doing collectively. And I think that the work that the Commission has been doing with the member states to kind of get behind kind of NATO capability targets and ensure that they are delivered in cost-effective ways, that's really what drives our interest in cooperating together on the SAFE instrument, for example, because we want to work together. Some of those areas, there will be UK firms contributing. You know, we have a traditional strength in maritime for rather obvious reasons. But there will be other areas where the cutting-edge technology is from Ukraine. And I'd like to pick up the point the Ukrainian ambassador made. As some of you probably know, we've worked very closely with Ukraine on training of soldiers. It's been one of our big contributions. But it's very striking when you talk to the people involved in that. The British Army is now redefining its infantry tactics to reflect what the Ukrainians have learnt from fighting with drones. And it's a transformation, and a lot of the technology that the Ukrainians have evolved on a sort of week-by-week basis on the battlefield completely transforms the way that armies need to operate. So for me, this sort of European neighbourhood, its great strength is that all the countries are quite different. If we all focus on kind of manufacture of munitions, for example, there's not very much comparative advantage in everybody trying to make shells. There is comparative advantage if we work together in the ways that hopefully the SAFE instrument should facilitate.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Everybody should have their own task to do rather than duplicating each other. So my last question to you, Dilek, and then I'll come to to the audience. I mean, we touched on it before, but it's related to this connectivity projects. I mean, the middle corridor, which is talked about a lot, but doesn't seem to have significantly advanced. What's the main challenge to actually advancing this middle corridor, which would go from Central Asia across the Caucasus and Turkey into the EU?
No, certainly it is one of the most critical areas, and we lack cooperation, concrete cooperation in that sense. I mean, there has been some projects, joint projects between EU and Turkey in the past, but under the global gateway, the progress is quite slow. We need more political engagement. I think the main obstacle there is, again, the political engagement. Once we ensure that framework, we can move, in fact, quite fast. Because, I mean, we just need to look at the map to understand Turkey is a central actor in the Middle Corridor project. It makes sense for the diversification and de-risking. Turkey already made a significant investment, especially in the road transport aspects. Another challenge for the way ahead, I would say, decarbonization, because now we need to also develop infrastructure together with EU and in the region to lower the emission of the corridor. So multimodality will be one of the key challenges, and that we need to definitely work on that together. And infrastructure security is another dimension, because when we're talking about transport corridors, we sometimes forget that it includes a lot of soft measures and digitalization as well. For instance, digitalization of the customs, or use of some technologies like blockchain, or we're in the age of AI, and it's not just a societal change, it is also the change, it's changing the way that we look at value chains, transport corridors. So we need to also work together to identify the new technologies and how we can align and secure the use of those technologies in the transport corridors. So these would both increase the cost effectiveness, time effectiveness, and also we can secure and diversify our logistical corridors. I would also add, I mean, Global Gateway, we don't only, as to see it, I mean, we don't only look at it from transportation perspective. It is also about, I mean, the original Global Gateway strategy includes digital, green research and innovation. I think it is one of the strengths of Global Gateway, which brings all these dimensions rightfully together. So Turkey has a role not only for in terms of middle corridor, but also for digital economy development and green transformation of the infrastructure as well.
Great, thank you.